Hi everyone, I'm back and no, I'm not planning on dropping one video and disappearing for 6 months this time. I'm back home next to my sewing machine, which means I can resume sewing. And today on the menu we have the single welt pocket. It's honestly easy peasy. Just breathe out and follow everything step by step. And make sure to always sew a trial piece before sewing on your main garment, just to make sure that this method suits the materials you're using. And since Russia's invasion on my country, Ukraine, is still going on, I'm going to leave links to organizations and volunteers I trust. Your donation to it, even the smallest amount, would mean a lot to me, and I would perceive it as a thank you gesture from you for these tutorials I make. Here are the formulas you can use when calculating the measurements of the pieces needed to make a single welt pocket. This might look intimidating at first, but if you take the time to understand it, it's actually not difficult. Or as a start, you can just use the measurements that I have used for my pocket and come back to these formulas later to adjust the measurements to your specific needs. After calculating all the measurements using the formulas from the first image, we cut our pieces. We will need one welt, one underwelt, and 2 pocket linings. Also, a small remark. I always use the metric system during my calculations. I try to convert some measurements to inches, but I can't guarantee their accuracy since I'm not used to this system. You can always double check and use a converter. I will leave a link to one in the video description box. One more measurement to add is the interfacing measurement. The interfacing measurements for the welt and underwelt are almost the same as for the welt and underwelt themselves. I make them only a couple of millimeters shorter on all sides. And we will also need the pocket opening interfacing, which I made bigger than the finished pocket itself by adding 7.5 centimeters to the length and 3.5 centimeters to the width, which made the interfacing 23 centimeters by 6 centimeters. I don't believe there is a solid rule for the pocket opening interfacing measurement, but this approximate formula seems to work fine. In the last image, you can see the scheme of the pocket opening that we will have to draw later. It's a rectangle with the measurements of our finished pocket. In my case, it's 15.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters, with a line in the center and 2 triangles on the sides with an altitude of 1.5 centimeters. First, we need to prepare our pieces. You will need to cut the welt, the underwelt, interfacing for the welt and underwelt. It should be non-stretchable at least lengthwise. Mine is non-stretchable both ways so that the welt doesn't stretch. You will also need interfacing for the pocket opening that will be fused to the main garment piece. And finally, 2 pocket linings. And I marked the right side and the wrong side with a W. Here I show how I'm interfacing my welt and underwelt. Since I used upcycled materials, my underwelt was already interfaced and it perfectly suited me, so I only had to interface my welt. Now, a small off topic, I have seen an interesting thing in some leather jackets that I have unpicked, that they used a non-woven interfacing that looks like fleece, and I believe it gives the welts a soft and fluffy look. So you can definitely experiment with interfacings. Another detail I've noticed when doing this method is like, for example, the welt eventually will be folded, and before fusing the non-woven interfacing, they fuse a woven tape around 1.5 centimeters in width right on the fold, so that the welt again doesn't stretch during exploitation. Now I don't want to overcomplicate it, it's just an interesting thing I've noticed. Just use whatever interfacing you have. Next, I'm going to fuse my interfacing to the wrong side of the main piece to mark the pocket opening area. Here I'm marking the exact placement of the pocket opening. When you have a pattern, you know exactly where it goes and you can draw it directly on the right side of the fabric. Here I was marking it with pins. I know pins and leather is a bad combo, but it's only a training piece and there will be no markings left since I'm going to cut out the area anyway. You can see me marking my pocket opening. In my case, it was 15.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters, using a special ink for leather. Next, I cut the center line until the tips of the triangles, then along both sides of the triangles. Be careful not to cut more than you need. Now I'm going to fixate the 4 sides of the opening to the wrong side using a leather tape. Hammering it down helps prevent the bulkiness. I also ironed it really quickly. It's always a good practice to iron every other step. I marked every side with a letter so that it's easier to explain further steps. A, B, C, and D, where D is going to be the open side. I put my main piece aside for a moment and get my underwelt and one of the linings. The lining opening is longer than the underwelt, which I made on purpose so that it gives me room to adjust the lining if needed. I align the underwelt with the lining, face to face or right side to the right side, fixate them with clips, and connect them with a stitch 1 centimeter away from the edge. After that, I flip it open and top stitch the lining 1-2 millimeters from the edge. Now to the welt. Fold it in half and iron it to get this nice shape. Align the open side of the welt with the right side of the second lining and fixate it with clips. Sew them together about ½ centimeter away from the edge. Don't forget to secure your stitch in the beginning and the end, and top stitch the lining 1-2 millimeter from the edge. I will need my tape again. I will put 2 lines, one on the B side and one on the D side. Attach the welt right side up like it's shown in the video. Make sure you like how it looks on the front side and make adjustments if needed. I made a mistake while making this video, that's why you can see stitch markings on the D side. I unpicked it, so just ignore it. We need to top stitch the B side 1-2 millimeters from the edge. I mark the start and the finish of my stitch. The starting point shouldn't be aligned with the A and C sides, it should be a bit off, so that eventually we stitch a rectangle around the opening. Manually bring down the needle right to the starting point and start sewing. I didn't secure the stitch since I want to do it manually for a neater finish. Finish sewing right on the second dot and make sure to leave the threads long to tie them. Pull the bottom thread, which is going to reveal the top thread. You can pull it using a pin and tie the threads 3 times. Cut them, but not too close to the knot. Next, I tape my underwelt piece, aligning the pocket linings. I flipped my piece to make sure everything looks good on the front side. It looks neat. After aligning everything, I secure my linings with some pins. I'm going to start stitching in the middle of the underwelt, around the pocket lining, and finish on the other side. Be careful not to stitch on the main fabric. You only need to connect the welt, underwelt, and the linings. Don't forget to secure the stitch and just go down. We are on the finishing line. We just have to top stitch the remaining sides A, D, and C. To make it nice and neat, we have to start right where our last stitch ended. And again, I mark my pivoting points for direction. I won't secure my stitches and will later tie knots by hand. Take your time and do the stitches manually where needed. Secure your stitches by tying the threads by hand. Lastly, I'm going to even out my linings. Make sure to leave a decent allowance depending on your fabric type. You can even serge it or use a bias tape for a fancier finish. And this is the final look. I think it looks very beautiful and neat. It looks simple, but also absolutely impressive at the same time. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and found it helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to leave suggestions for next videos. Take care and bye bye.